Man, sales is tough. I'm just not cut out to be a salesperson. Have you ever felt that way? Selling doesn't need to be so difficult. My name is Harry Spate. I'm here to serve and to help you succeed. Join me as we discuss sales made easy. What is the good word? Today I have with me a dear friend of mine, the world-renowned Brian Sexton. And if you don't know Brian, you've got to find him and follow him. He is on every podcast channel known to man. He's got a great podcast called The Intentional Encourager. And Brian truly is one that encourages. He is also an author, wrote a book about his dad's way of selling, which I know Brian puts into practice in his life, and that book is People Buy From People. I'm really looking forward to this conversation. So Brian Sexton, welcome to the Sales Made Easy podcast, my friend.
Well, again, me, Harry Spade. I love a little shameless promotion. So I'm wearing a People Buy From People pullover for this conversation. And by the way, I was telling you this before we started recording. I am a lifelong Cincinnati Bengals fan, and as we record this podcast, the Bengals broke a 31-year playoff drought on Saturday, beating the Las Vegas Raiders. So all hail to my Cincinnati Bengals this year. Salute to service hat. And so I thought I would rock this for a few minutes to, just keep the celebration going. So, but what a great honor to be on the Sales Made Easy podcast. I love what you're doing and so proud of you with your new podcast and your book. And so, man, what an honor to be here today, Harry.
Well, thank you. The honor is all mine, Brian. As you know, podcasting really opens up the door to meet some tremendous people. And you and I met, not through podcasting, through something else, but we've shared podcasting opportunities before. So it's always a pleasure in speaking with you. You truly have a great sales mind. And I was just curious, today I was talking to somebody and we're talking about the spirit of competition in sales. Mm-hmm. Whereas some people feel like it's cutthroat and they got to step on their competition's neck and beat them. And I'm just curious as to how the intentional encourager feels about competition in business.
Boy, that's a great one. I've got a story behind that one. You know me, I've got a lot of stories. And so
I love it.
I remember the first real territory that I took was 1997, October of 1997. And I'll kind of tee this up. So a family friend of ours, my dad told me as I was getting ready to graduate or getting ready to leave college, I didn't graduate. I missed graduating in May of 1995. By flunking a geology class at Marshall University. Now, you go to get a marketing degree and you have to take geology. That was what Marshall did. And Harry, I had the bright idea that year that I would just go to class a couple of times, get my D in geology and get my degree. And that didn't work out too well. But fortunately for me, we had a great family friend named Larry. And Larry, I called him on my dad's recommendation and he said, well, hang on just a few minutes. So he put me on the phone. Long story short, I took my first job in June of 1995 working for a food broker. Well, Larry had always kept his eye on me. I interviewed a couple of times with U.S. Food Service for sales positions. And I got a phone call on a Friday late morning. And I was going to take a job with another food broker. And Larry called me and said, don't do it. We want to offer you a position. We had a guy that just quit 2 hours ago. I want to put you in that position. And the funny thing about it was the guy that was leaving the company was going to the competition. And he was a good friend of mine named Dave. And I ended up having to sell against Dave for the next 2 or 3 years. We were direct competition. And in the beginning, it was a little weird because we were competing against each other. And I was of the mindset, that old school mindset of, man, that's your competition. They're going to take food out of your family's mouth and things like that. And, over time, I had to just stop and say, no, the only person that's going to take food out of my family's mouth is me. If I'm not consistent, if I'm not doing what I'm supposed to do, if I'm not delivering the kind of value that I need to deliver. And so it was a real growth period for me, because I was in my mid to late 20s, really thought that I knew a lot. In hindsight, I would have loved to have, what I would have loved to have done? I would have loved to have taken that 27-year-old Brian Sexton and sat him down for lunch with 49-year-old Brian Sexton and Harry Spade, and we could have just talked to him, and had our good friend Eric Conovalov with us, and we could have just put our arms around him and said, "There's so much we could teach you." And so, yeah, I had to learn how to coexist with my competition, because I was trying to change who I was, because those folks were competitors, and I really should have. Now, I'll say this: later in my selling career, I had a competitor a little bit later down the road. I had a competitor that said, "Hey, I've got a sales lead for you." And I think she thought she was dumping some trash on me, but in actuality, it turned out to be one of my best accounts that I had. So I really had to learn to coexist with my competition, and really just kind of figure out, how we could best work together and be friendly with each other. But, understand that my role was to do the best that I could for my company and my family, and ultimately for my customers.
Yeah, it's so great. It's like you have a lot of listeners on your podcast, but I'm willing to bet you would like more.
I have
And
listeners by the tens, Harry.
yeah,
There's
okay,
tens
right.
of people. There's
I
tens of
have
people.
single digits.
There's tens of people listening to the Intentional Encourager podcast. I mean,
I
it's just
love it. You're
it's
such a phony.
it's
Yeah,
mind blowing, the tens of
yeah.
people that are listening. Listen, I'll share a quick story with you. Again, my son came to me after I launched the Intentional Encourager podcast, and he said, "Dad, I want to start my own podcast." And of course, as a father, I'm just beaming with pride. I said, "Well, let me know what I can help you do." He said, "I don't need your help." He said, "I'm going to call it the
Oh,
He
I
said,
love
I'm going to call it the unintentional discourager." So my son's
kids.
21. Yeah. Oh,
Yeah,
he's great.
kids.
He's
You
great.
gotta love them.
I'm telling you what, he is way smarter than I am. He's got, I mean, he's a rising superstar. And I'm not just saying that because he's mine. He just impresses me all the time of the things that he's done and can do. He's a mechanical engineering major, so that's got to tell you he's way smarter than I am. And he was on the dean's list this last semester at Marshall, so
He's
that will
not getting a
obviously.
D in geology, I guess, right?
Oh heavens, no! Oh heavens, no!
Or
No,
he's not striving. He's not
that
striving for a
that was
D.
literally one of the dumbest things I've ever done in my life.
Well,
Was
if that's it, then
that.
you've lived a pretty good life. So,
I hope so.
all right. So we're talking. So this thing about competition. So everyone, in my opinion, has their audience, right? We all, whether you have a podcast, whether it's your group of friends, we
Yeah,
have our audience, and we have people that like us, and then people who are just, they could take us as we, whatever, take us or
yeah,
leave us, right?
yeah,
And we don't mind, right? So it's like, well, not every buyer is going to buy from us, and that's okay. Doesn't mean there's not room for competition. And I'm curious as to what was the light bulb. Was it a gradual lightening of the light bulb for you where you said, what, competition is really not that important? I really shouldn't worry about it. What was it for you?
Well, I think when I began to understand the value that I brought to customers, when I began to understand my UVP, my unique value proposition, and I think for me that really changed in probably 2005, 2006, when a good friend of mine recruited me to the largest division of the largest food service company in North America, and that was Cisco Food Services. And I go through a couple. This is a great one as well too. I'm in my first day of training, and the trainer was a guy I respect a great deal. His name is Terry Winkfield, and Terry was a trainer. And Terry had was his father was American, but his mother was I think she was French or Canadian, but Terry had a French accent. And this was exactly how he said it, Harry. He looked at me and he says, "Hey, Brian, you're not gonna be here long, buddy, because the typical training for them for new marketing associates was like 6 weeks. You had to go to Cincinnati and stay the week and then drive home." And he, after about a half a day, the first day, he's like, "Nah, you're not going to be here 6 weeks. I was only there 2 weeks, and it was really getting down their computer systems and things like that. But my friend David told me, he said, I'm not going to give you accounts. He said, you know this market well enough to know that you're just going to go after, you're going to go find the accounts. And that's what I did. And so what I understood was, I understood how to bring value to those customers where my competitors were falling a little short. And I really knew the competitor I knew at that time was US Foods. Obviously, I'd been with them for almost 5 years, and I'd been a broker around them. And so I kind of went after their customers, but I also went after other competitors' customers. But it was understanding the value. It was understanding, I know how to help you be profitable. I'll price you consistently, and I'll show you ways that you can make more money. And so when I did that, I was able to go in and take accounts at good profit margins. My first year there, I was writing ungodly gross profit margins. I was the number 2 guy in my district and probably in the top 5 or 10 in our company. I mean, my territory wasn't huge by any means, but I knew how to generate the gross profit. And it wasn't that I was taking advantage of people. I just knew how to give them great value and give them a great buying experience from me and the company.
Yeah, exactly. So that leads to a whole nother topic, but I just wanted to finish up on this one about the competition. I remember, I mean, you must know people that speak down about the competition, right? How
Well,
does
that's
that
kind of how
typically?
we were. Well, that's kind of how we were brought up in
Yeah,
sales. Is,
yeah.
like I said a moment ago, the competition is trying to take food out of your family's mouth.
Hmm.
They're evil. They are just,
Yeah.
they're the scum of the earth and terrible and horrible. Even the company that I ended up going to work for, Cisco, I was just like, oh, they're horrible. They're terrible. And a funny one is, so there was a guy that was going to come to our company. We had a merger with another food company when I was at US Foods. Sexton merged with us, and there was a guy about 2 hours away, and he was a superstar at Sexton. Well, he decides he's going to go to work for Cisco, and I'm like, well, forget that guy. I can't stand that guy.
Oh boy.
I can't believe he's not coming to work for us. Forget him, man. We're gonna torch him. Forget him. That guy ended up being my right hand man when I became a district sales manager. And I learned a ton from Mike, and Mike and I became really good friends. And, but back in those days, man, back in the late 90s, that's just kind of how you viewed the competition. Like,
Yeah,
forget you,
exactly.
man.
Yeah. I mean, if you haven't been in a corporate sales position, it seems like you're the only one that is justifiably selling and serving others. Everyone else is,
Exactly.
you know,
I'm the one leading the noble cause. Everybody else is just trying to destroy the kingdom. So
yeah,
yeah.
exactly. Well put. So, yeah, so the competition thing is not a bad. And if you feel like you ever want to say something negative about the competition, what's your advice? If you're speaking to a prospect and you're tempted to say something negative about the competition, what would be your advice?
The same thing that I used to tell my salespeople.
And
Anything you
what's,
say can and will be used against you. We have that. Listen, when someone, and I've never been arrested for anything, but when someone is arrested, we read them their Miranda rights. We tell them, you have the right to remain silent. You have a right to an attorney. You have a right to this. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. And so that works great for salespeople. You have to understand that if you tell a customer something, at some point they may use it against you. And so my dad always used to say, if you say it, own it. And so that's what I would tell my salespeople. I would say, anything you say can and will be used against you. So you better understand that you need to be men and women of your word. You need to be people of your word. I had a sales guy that was new with the company when I was a district manager, and he was working on this large restaurant, Harry. And I went with him to the account to meet the account as a good district manager should. And the owner of the restaurant pulls me aside and he said, I need to talk to you. It's okay. He said, your sales
mhm.
guy's made me a bunch of promises he hasn't
Oh,
delivered on.
yeah.
And I said, okay, let's take care of that right now. I said, and so I got my notebook out and I said, tell me the things that he's promised you that you don't have. And he starts naming stuff off. I said, okay, I'll tell you what I'm going to do. before I leave here, I'll have 2 or 3 things off of that list. I said, I'll make 2 or 3 phone calls right now. If you give me 5 or 10 minutes, I'll make some phone calls. And so I did that. I came back to him and I said, okay, I've got these couple things lined up. Give me some time and I'll work on these few things. And I said, here's another thing I'm going to do. I'm going to have a conversation with our salesperson. And I said, if that continues to happen again, let me know and we'll replace, we'll do something else.
Yeah.
We want you to be confident. So we're driving back down the road. And I told him, I looked over at him. I said, I need to stop at Walmart. If you don't mind, before you take me to my car, I need to stop at Walmart. It's okay. And I'm the boss. So what's he going to tell me? No, we're not going to stop at Walmart. No, I'm his boss. And so we get to Walmart and I told him, I said, won't you come in with me for a minute? Okay. So he walks in with me and we walk into the office supplies area. And I said, he said, what are you doing? I said, I'm looking for a notebook. And I said, do you see one you like there? He said, what do you mean? I said, I'm going to buy you a notebook and you're going to start taking notes. Because when we left that customer, that's what I was doing in the back room talking with that customer. He's told me about 5 or 6 things that you haven't followed through on. And I said, I've taken care of some of them. I said, but you're not going to do that anymore. I said, because not only is your reputation at fault, but our reputation is at fault. And I said, you've got to make sure that you're buttoned up. You've got to make sure that what you're telling people you follow through on. And so I think he learned his lesson that day, but it was an important reminder for me as well, too, that anything I say, and I would tell my salespeople, I'm like, look, I can walk into your account and promise them anything. I don't have to walk in here tomorrow. I'm the district manager. You're the guy that's walking here. I said, but here's the thing. It's not about that. It's about credibility. It's about integrity. It's about setting ourselves to a higher standard than our competition. That's the thing that I would leave with salespeople is set a higher standard than your competition. Don't just try to match what your competition is doing. Raise the standard. Raise the standard of the marketplace to where everybody has to come to your level, not the other way around.
Yeah, that's great stuff. Yeah, I mean, so this is true with anybody who is selling, right? Regardless if you're in sales or if you're a business owner and you're selling, is the simple things about staying true to your word. And even though we're all going to make mistakes, it's when you're building a list of things that you've neglected, that's not a good thing, right?
Well,
So,
no, and
right?
Harry, here's something else. Let me jump in with this too.
Sure.
If your word can't be counted on in business, it can't be counted on in life.
Right.
Because there is a pattern that happens to people that don't keep their word. They don't keep their word to their wife. They don't keep their word to their kids. They don't keep their word to their family. And so,
Yeah,
you
it's
can't
definitely true.
you can't separate your business and your personal life when you're not keeping your word. If you're not keeping your word in one part of your life, you're not going to keep your word in any part of your life. And so
Right.
that would be the biggest piece of advice that I could give a salesperson of any pedigree or any skill level is what I should say.
Mm-hmm.
Any skill level. It should be keep your word, whether you're just starting out in sales or you've been in sales for 40 years.
Mm-hmm.
Always keep your word.
Yeah. And so a simple thing. So it's not like people are intentionally lying,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's just a person can be forgetful. But the
Oh,
challenge
100%.
is right. But the challenge is perception
Mm-hmm.
for all salespeople is that they're going to get the sale and pretty much disappear until you start earning trust. Isn't
Or,
that right? Or
or,
no?
or,
What's your
or,
thought?
or I'll get the sale and figure out the details later.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know,
That's
I'll get,
definitely right.
I,
Just say
I'll get,
yes to everything and then right. Yeah.
I'll get the sale and then I'll figure out the details later.
Mm-hmm.
So if you promise somebody something and, we'll go, well, we'll figure it out later. I'm sure they'll go along. I'm sure our internal people will go along with it.
Yeah.
Man, we got to have this customer. So I'm sure we'll figure it out. Or, I'm a top 5 salesperson in our company. Why wouldn't they go along with what I need to do to get this customer or want to do to get this customer? People like that, Harry, a lot of times, what I've seen in my career, they forget that they're not building equity with those people that are helping them do things. So when we talk about people buy from
That's a good
people,
point.
we talk about people buy from people. You better make sure your internal customers are just as happy as your external customers. You better be sure that they're as much connected with you as your external customers are connected with you. And I said this in the book, and I've said it so much, it's a broken record almost. People buy connection before they ever make a transaction, internal customers and external customers. Because again, you've got to be connected to something. Here's what I'm talking about.
Mm-hmm.
This, I took my hat off because one, I wanted to be nice and as formal as I could be. I've got my glasses on. I normally wear contacts, but this hat here, you know what connects me to this hat? I'm a fan of the Cincinnati Bengals. I've been a fan since I was a kid. I feel that connection. And so if they put a hat out that I like, what do you think I'm going to do? Now, my wife bought this for me because she knows that I'm a huge Bengals fan. But there's the connection there. And so I've got that connection. And so I look for things that I can buy and products that I can buy that's got the logo on it. I'm already connected. And so that before I ever make a transaction to buy a piece of gear, I'm already connected. And it's the same way with your customers. There's a lot of times your customers are already connected. They just need to find other things to buy from you. If
True.
that's the case, if you have multiple products, you have multiple
Yep.
services, if they're already connected with you in one area, you got to find ways to connect with everything else you have to offer them. So, but it starts with being connected to your internal customers, people that are really going to help. It's not your external customers a lot of times that make you successful. It's your internal customers that make you successful.
Exactly. So, talk to me a little bit about that as far as the internal customers are concerned. Again, a lot of people who are in sales make it the me show. The no I in teams seems to somehow
Yeah, but there is
they
a me in
forget
team.
that.
That
Yeah,
there is a me in team. Yeah.
exactly. So, talk to me on that.
Well, internal customers, think about it this way. Um, and I'll share with you. I'll share with you a little vignette here. So, as I mentioned, I'm a diehard Bengals fan. The last few years, their head coach Zach Taylor. The first year he was 2-14 in the 2019 season, 2-14. That earned them the right to pick the number one pick, and they got a guy named Joe Burrow. Last year they were 4-11-1, and Burrow gets hurt midway through the 11th game. That locker room could have quit on him at any time.
Mm-hmm.
But here's what happened. They were a connected team. And he said this after week 4. They beat the Jaguars on a Thursday night game, and they're behind, and Burrow leads them down. They kick a field goal to win. And Zach Taylor said something that resonated with me in the locker room speech. The first thing he said, hey, that's a connected team if I've ever seen one. And that resonated with me. So much so, Harry, I called the Bengals on Monday. That was on a Thursday night. Saw that on Friday. I called the Bengals on Monday and I said, I want to send a copy of my book to Coach Taylor because that resonated with me so much. The concept of a connected team.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I'm saying about your internal customers. When you have decided as a salesperson that you're going to connect with your internal team to the point you know their birthdays, you know their husband's name, you know their kid's name, you tell them what you value about them, you give them as much intentional encouragement as you can. Every time, every conversation starts with focusing on them, then they'll move mountains for you.
Yeah, totally.
They will go to the ends of the earth for you. But a lot of times, to your point, and I love the way you said it, it's the me show. A lot of times it's what can you do for me? How can you help me? When a lot of times it should be, do you mind? Do you mind or would you mind has opened more doors for me in my
Mm-hmm.
career.
Mm-hmm.
That 3-word question to start a sentence that has opened more doors for me than anything that I could ever use. Ask permission.
Yeah, that's great.
Ask permission. would you mind helping me on this project? Or I know you're really busy and I respect your time. Would you mind helping me with this? And if people are connected to you, they'll go, no, I don't mind a bit.
Right. Yeah.
I'd love to.
Yeah. It's good. So this thing about me and I in team, I was just listening to a book on Audible.
Was it
Who
Selling with
not?
Dignity?
No, because the author is not good at reading out loud. I guess I don't know.
Oh man, don't
But
sell yourself short. Don't sell
this,
yourself short.
yeah, that's a future project. But this book is actually Who Not How, written in part by Dan Kennedy, and I forget the other author's name.
Yeah.
And they talk about what were we talking about? Team. And so one of the examples was Michael Jordan. How Michael Jordan, his first 6 years in the NBA, I mean, he's scoring all kinds of points, but he was not winning championships.
Yeah.
And eventually the Chicago Bulls started putting players around him, but the key person in his life became the coach, Phil Jackson. Right? So he organized the team to have a higher vision than just independent Michael, who was the best NBA player at the maybe, but I mean, debatable, but one of the best with a couple of other players out there.
Mm-hmm.
But the whole point was is that when they became focused on the bigger picture as a team and collaborators with a goal in mind, good things started to happen.
Well,
And when
you've got to
talk to
remember
me.
where Michael Jordan came from. Michael Jordan came from a coach in Dean Smith that was the ultimate disciplinarian and structure guy. When the North Carolina Tar Heels, when Michael Jordan started as a freshman for the North Carolina Tar Heels, but Coach Smith, because he was a freshman, would not put him on the cover of Sports Illustrated with the other four guys that were on that team. James Worthy was on the cover. Sam Perkins was on the cover. Jimmy Black was on the cover. Matt Doherty was on the cover. No Michael Jordan. He was a freshman. And Coach Smith said, you got to earn your way up. But in the big moment of his freshman year, Michael Jordan hits a 16-footer from the corner to beat Georgetown in the national championship game. So he gets the Chicago Bulls. And Jordan has said this. He said this in The Last Dance, Harry. He said, I got to the Bulls, and there were guys smoking at halftime. They were drinking beers at halftime. And he said that was not.
Can you imagine?
Yeah. And their coach at the time was a guy who'd been in the NBA forever, a guy named Stan Albeck. And Stan Albeck was, he's like, well, these guys are pros. I don't care if they drink beer as long as we go out and win. But Jordan had to raise the level of competition there. And so they fire Stan Albeck. They hired Doug Collins. And Doug Collins moved that team forward. They drafted a guy named Charles Oakley. They had Michael Jordan. They had some other – they were starting to get better. What you're referring to was a guy named Scottie Pippen, who they brought in a draft day trade. They traded Charles Oakley to the New York Knicks and got a guy named Bill Cartwright who could play the middle, who could be that distributor and facilitator. They drafted Horace Grant. So again, the pieces coming together, but you're right. It was Phil Jackson who got that. But the one thing that really got them over the hump, Harry, was a series that they played against the Detroit Pistons, where the Detroit Pistons had punched them in the mouth. They had done all kinds of things to them. And the Pistons, when they finally figured out, we are not backing down, we're not taking their junk anymore, and they stood up to the Pistons, that's when they got over the hump, and that's when they won. So we were talking about our competition a little bit earlier. When you decide that, A, we've got better talent, 2, we can do things better, and your value in what you do and what you do well, and you just say, you know what, I'm getting tired of getting punched in the mouth by my competition, that's when you ascend to that next level. And that's what happened to Jordan and the Bulls was they not only, you're right, they had to assemble the right talent, but they also had to take a different mental approach and say, talent's not going to get it for us. We've got to and the Detroit Pistons were the most physical team in basketball at the time. They had to punch the bully in the mouth. And sometimes, again, sometimes you've got to just take a competition's biggest account and say, hey, there was obviously a reason that they chose us over you guys. Maybe we did something a little bit better than you guys do. You can never, let me say this real quick. Never take your biggest customer for granted. I had a sales manager that told me one time, he said, Brian, you got to always be prepared to replace your best customer.
Mm-hmm.
And so again, forgive me for going into a historical diatribe on the Chicago Bulls, but
yeah, but I mean, it's so just how does that apply to sales and business, would you say?
well, I had a boss when I was a district manager. We didn't agree on many things, but he did tell me something that I took with me. He said, hard work beats talent when talent doesn't work hard.
Yeah, it's a great line.
And so you've got to continue, but you've also got to, along with that, here's what I will say. A salesperson can make 100 calls a day, and you go to your sales manager, and your sales manager says, "We haven't sold anything. What's going on?" "Oh, but I've made 100 calls today." Effort should never be a substitute for execution. You can't not execute. And so what I would tell you is that in sales, you've got to learn to execute. How do you deliver that value? What does that value look like? How are you connecting with your customers so that you understand what good value looks like to them and how you can deliver that with your product or service? Because effort means nothing unless you can execute. It's like putting 5 kids in the game to play basketball and them coming to the sidelines, and the coach is going, "We're getting beat 38-0. "Oh, but coach, we're hustling up and down the court." "Yeah, but you're not playing defense. You're letting them score at will. You're turning the ball over. You're dribbling it off your foot. You're throwing up bricks from 2 feet away. Effort is
It sounds
great."
like my basketball skills.
Well, I didn't get that far. I was going to play basketball my senior year, and then I decided, well, my dad said you have to work to be able to afford to drive a car, and 2, I knew I was going to play baseball my senior year, so I wanted to apply I was undefeated as a pitcher my senior year. I was 2-0 my senior year.
That's great. It's a great season.
It's undefeated.
Yeah. So what I really enjoy about this conversation is that you can learn a ton in sports, right? Successful sports teams and ones who are not successful.
Yeah.
Without talking about names of individual players, but you can look at pretty much any team and just see years and years of futility, losing records, not making the playoffs, changing head coaches, and everyone who's ever interviewed on those teams, you just hear bad attitudes.
Yep.
But the winners, right? I mean, I'm a Patriots fan, and
sorry about Saturday night.
They were not always a great team, and they're
No.
turning back into a team that they were without Tom Brady. But the point is that they were on a mission every year. Every year, the mission was to win the Super Bowl and for people to do their job. And, it was a routine.
But Harry, you've
Right.
got to have some good fortune too. And I'll go back here. The New England Patriots in 1971 drafted a guy named Jim Plunkett. He was the #1 overall pick. He was a Heisman Trophy winner from Stanford. And Jim Plunkett got hurt a couple of years into his New England career. And he bounced around. He went to San Francisco and bounced around there, and then got to the Oakland Raiders, where he finally won a couple Super Bowls.
Yeah.
But again, you've got to have some good fortune. And then the Patriots followed that up with a guy named Steve Grogan, who led them to a lot of success. They were just never able to get over the hump.
Right.
And it wasn't that. And Steve Grogan had a great tight. He had John Hanna. He had Russ Francis. I mean, they had some great.
How in the world do you know the New England Patriots? I mean, you're from West Virginia. I mean, only us New Englanders know
Harry,
them.
I studied football cards. Believe it or not,
Okay.
I collected football cards, and I would just read football cards and
Yeah.
things like that.
You're dropping some names, man.
Well,
Russ Francis and John Hanna.
Okay,
That's
but then again, Grogan gets a little bit older, so the Patriots decide, well, we got to draft a young quarterback. So they draft a guy named Tony Eason from Illinois. And so, they get Craig James and they get Irving Fryer and some other guys, Andre Tippett and some of those guys. But you're right. It wasn't until Bill Parcells, Raymond Berry was the coach in the 80s when they got to the Super Bowl against the Bears. But then they kind of dipped a little bit. And Parcells coming in like 93, 94, brought him back up. And they drafted Drew Bledsoe, number 1. And they had, for a few years there while Parcells was there, they won. And then they bring in Pete Carroll and then just kind of slide back. But it happens. Every sales org is going to have those good times and they're going to have those ebbs and flows, no matter what kind of talent you have. And the Patriots lost some talent there in the 90s, but they picked up some talent as well too. Curtis Martin was there for a while, Hall of Fame running back. But again, it happens to every sales organization. You're going to have to, and I'll tell you this, what I told the guys that worked for me, the guys and gals that worked for me, don't prospect when you're down. When your sales are down. Everybody prospects when sales are down. You prospect when you're up by 40%. If you're kicking butt in your sales year, keep prospecting, keep putting that foot in the ground. Because the story that I shared with my team was that, in the Bible, Joseph there was a dream, and Joseph interpreted the dream, and the dream was that the land of Egypt was going to have 7 years of plenty, followed by 7 years of famine. And the Lord in that dream told him to store it up. Take all the corn, take all the grain, store it up, because the famine's coming. And so that's what I told my team. I said, when you're up 30, 40%, that's when you prospect. That's when you keep after it, because next year your history is going to come around and you may be behind 20%. And that prospecting that you did is going to keep that number from being bigger. But you can continue to tap into that well and prospect when things are down. That's the biggest mistake that I see a lot of salespeople make, is they only prospect when they're behind. Don't prospect when you're behind, prospect when you're ahead. Keep putting points on the board when you're ahead.
Yeah, definitely. I would agree that you want to prospect when you're ahead. And I would encourage you to prospect some when you're behind too, because you're going to have to keep stirring the pot. Good things will eventually happen though, right? But the hard work, I love the line, the hard work beats talent when talent doesn't work hard. And it's funny, when people are riding the wave up high, they think that's the way it's always going to be. So the bad doesn't last forever, and the good doesn't last forever.
And you have to continue to work on your craft. You have to continue perfecting your craft. I've been in sales and sales management and customer engagement going on 27 years, and I find myself still trying to perfect my craft, find new ways of connecting with people, find new avenues. The biggest thing that I did several years ago, let me share this with your audience. I have ADD. If something comes, if I look around, I see something.
Okay. Sorry, I shouldn't chuckle.
I had to train my brain to focus on people and look them in the eye. Because the problem that we have in our society today, Harry, is we do not place an emphasis and a value on looking people in the eye when we talk to them. And that connects people better than anything that I have ever seen, is when you look someone in the eye and you talk to them and you say, I'm present in this conversation. I'm in the moment in this conversation, even virtually. You can still look someone in the eye virtually, and they get that sense that you're engaged. So I would tell a salesperson out there, if you get to go out and you're meeting with your customers right now, face to face, look them in the eye. And when they're speaking, keep that attention on them. Don't take your eyes off of them, because in that moment, they're the most important person in your world.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. Brian Sexton dropping some bombs of wisdom, some sports history, some sales history. Brian, what would you like to add to the show today? A little bit about Brian Sexton. Can you tell the group a little bit about what you're doing these days?
Oh boy. I find the older I get, the less I like to talk about myself because,
Well, I'm asking you, so you
I
get
know,
to,
I
right?
know. Well,
You get the stage.
I know, but that's kind of a function of our world, Harry, isn't it? Is kind of self promotion. I think we probably should do a little less of it. I think we should promote others and put ourselves aside. But I have a podcast called the Intentional Encourager Podcast, and every week we tell stories of people that have got powerful stories. They've overcome some things. Um, I would leave this for the audience is if you want something different, if you want something that is that will leave you just going, wow, that was a great story. I know there's a lot of podcasts out there, but we really do strive every podcast to bring a story that's powerful. You told your story on the podcast, and that was powerful. The places you've been and the things you've done in your life, that was awesome. And so the Intentional Encourager podcast, you can find it on all the podcast distribution channels. We also have a YouTube channel. So if you like to watch a conversation, I'm getting to that point in my life where I like to watch conversation. I like to watch the interaction between guest and host. You can watch us, just search in YouTube, the Intentional Encourager podcast. Harry mentioned my book has been out a little over a year, called People Buy from People, 10 Powerful People Lessons from the Ultimate People Person, my dad. My dad was a salesperson for over 40 years, a connector, the ultimate original intentional encourager. And I talk about his impact and the connecting lessons that he taught me that you can add to your repertoire and use in your life to connect deeper, powerful, and stronger with people. You can find me on LinkedIn at Brian Sexton MBA. You can find me on Twitter at Brian Sexton 13. Find me on Facebook. Just search the Intentional Encourager podcast. So this is, and if you watch the Intentional Encourager podcast on YouTube, you will see a spot featuring Selling with Dignity, my friend Harry Spate's book. So, again, it's about lifting other people and getting their stories to the forefront. So, and if you think you've got a great story to tell, connect with me and let's see if we can tell it on the Intentional Encourager podcast.
Great stuff. Brian Sexton, ladies and gentlemen, thanks for joining us on the Sales Made Easier. Great help today, and I look forward to more conversations and seeing and listening to more of the Intentional Encourager on other great podcast shows that you do. So great.
Harry Spate, you are absolutely the best. I love what you're doing. You are just, we need more people like Harry Spate. We need more people like you that help salespeople just be themselves and trainings are great and courses are great. There's a ton of, and you and I, they're friends of yours and mine. I just love what you're doing and how uniquely you're doing it in this space. So thank you. One, for being my friend, and two, for doing what you're doing with Selling with Dignity and the Sales Made Easy podcast.
There you have it, from the Intentional Encourager himself. Thank you, Brian.
Thanks, Harry.
Man, sales is tough. I'm just not cut out to be a salesperson. Have you ever felt that way? Selling doesn't need to be so difficult. My name is Harry Spate. I'm here to serve and to help you succeed. Join me as we discuss Sales Made Easy.